He entered his restaurant anticipating a peaceful lunch, but everything shifted the instant he spotted 3 little girls being ushered out of the establishment he believed he had under control. Henry Winslow entered his flagship restaurant with the same assured precision that characterized every aspect of his existence. He was more than the CEO of a luxury dining empire. He was its creator, its essence, and its iconic figure. In his sharp navy suit, crisp white shirt, and a gold watch subtly visible beneath his cuff, he embodied the essence of a man who meticulously avoided the chaos of unforeseen events. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his blue eyes sharp yet composed, and each movement appeared deliberate, intentional. He entered for a typical lunch prior to an investor meeting across town, anticipating nothing beyond his regular quiet corner table, a seared salmon with lemon risotto, and 15 minutes of undisturbed authority. The restaurant staff sprang into action upon his arrival, exchanging courteous nods and discreet gestures of acknowledgement. Silence reigned, with words only exchanged when necessary, precisely as Henry preferred. The manager led him to his familiar spot by the window, where the scene outside showcased the lively street of the city. As the waiter drew near, he reached for his phone to check his emails, but a sudden distraction caught his attention. A change swept through the dining room, where hushed voices and tense murmurs filled the air, leading to an abrupt silence that drew his gaze away from the screen. Initially, it didn't seem significant to him. However, he noticed a stir at the distant side of the restaurant, close to the more casual seating section by the glass doors. 3 little girls sat at a table that obviously wasn't theirs, encircled by a hostess and a waitress who appeared quite anxious. The staff were not unkind, yet they maintained a resolute stance. The girls appeared out of sync with their surroundings, clad in mismatched pink jackets and white cotton dresses, their blonde braids a bit disheveled, and their shoes marked and wet from the pavement. No orders had been placed. One of them grasped a dollar bill in her tiny hand, another held an apple, while the third gazed down at her vacant place setting with wide, serious eyes. The manager was making their way toward them, probably to request their departure. Henry squinted, his gaze sharp and focused. The way the tiniest girl clutched her sister's arm compelled him to rise before he even registered his own movement. He moved through the restaurant at a deliberate pace, sensing the abrupt hush that fell behind him, fully aware that every member of the staff had their eyes on him. As he neared the table, the girls glanced up. They appeared to be mirror images of one another, triplets, it seemed, each possessing the same striking blue eyes. Yet, within those eyes lay a chilling intensity that paralyzed him. Do not fear. Not playful antics. Another thing entirely. Acknowledgement. He felt uncertain. Before anyone had a chance to respond, one of the girls gently spoke up, saying that their mom had instructed them to come here. She mentioned that our father is the one who possesses this establishment. Silence enveloped the room. Henry gazed at her, his heart pounding in his chest like a foreboding signal. He parted his lips, yet silence enveloped him. The team awaited his cue. The girls turned to him, seeking a response. For the first time in years, Henry Winslow found himself at a loss for words. The stillness that enveloped the room after the girls spoke weighed more than any silence he had ever encountered in a conference setting. Henry remained motionless, gazing at the trio of little girls before him, their matching faces radiating an essence that felt out of place in the polished, upscale restaurant. Something genuine, unrefined, and profoundly authentic. He sensed the gaze of his staff and a few patrons fixated on the unfolding drama, yet none of that held any significance for him. In that fleeting instant, the only sound that resonated was the unwavering, resolute voice of the child who had just asserted her identity as his daughter. His thoughts surged with reason, yet memories surged forth, ones he had long kept at bay. Clara. The name crashed over him like a tidal wave. 7 years prior, she had disappeared from his existence without a word of reason. One moment she filled his kitchen with laughter, sharing whispers of future dreams, and the next, she vanished. She had never answered his calls. He never received a response to his letters. Initially, he felt a surge of anger, followed by a deep sense of devastation, and in time, He concealed her in a part of his heart that remained untouched by others. He was unaware of her pregnancy. He was completely unaware that she had departed from the city. Before him stood 3 unmistakable reflections of her, their blonde hair mirroring hers, their eyes strikingly similar to his own. He inhaled deeply and lowered himself to their height, ensuring he didn't startle them. "What do you go by?" he inquired softly. "I'm Sophie, the one who spoke about the dollar." The second girl, the one holding the apple, introduced herself, saying, "I'm Grace." The third, softer voice whispered, "I'm Layla." Henry nodded, striving to maintain a calm tone. "And your mother," she was known as Clara. Each of them nodded in agreement. Sophie mentioned that she became quite ill. "Our home isn't too distant. However, as her condition deteriorated, she instructed us to come here. She mentioned that if anything were to occur, I should seek out the individual who operates that restaurant. He is your father." Her voice trembled at the conclusion, and Henry sensed a profound shift within himself. He rose and surveyed the staff, who remained motionless, caught in a moment of uncertainty about their next move. "It's all right," he murmured softly. "They've decided to remain." He gestured towards the table next to his regular seat. "Provide them with something cozy, anything they desire, and instruct the kitchen to handle it directly." He faced no inquiries. The girls transitioned to the new table, pausing momentarily until he extended his hand and softly rested it on Sophie's shoulder. That was sufficient. They remained seated, clutching their modest possessions, a single dollar and an apple, as if releasing them would render everything too tangible. As they started their meal, Henry positioned himself opposite them, observing every subtle gesture with a mix of incredulity and increasing admiration. He posed soft inquiries, mindful of not inundating them. They informed him of Clara's condition, of the neighbor who kept a watchful eye on them during her time in the hospital. Unbeknownst to them, she had slipped into a coma. They believed she was simply taking a break. Upon hearing those words, he felt a sudden tightness in his throat. He understood that these girls had arrived here driven by love and trust, rather than by desperation. They held fast to the tale their mother wove, believing so deeply that they sought out a man in a suit and embraced him as their father. He attempted to envision Clara's emotions, aware that her time was limited, as she made the difficult decision to send her daughters to the one individual she believed could safeguard them. It shattered him to imagine her confronting that choice by herself. It shattered him to understand that despite all his years spent constructing empires, brokering billion-dollar agreements, and dominating the news, he had overlooked the most significant moment of his existence, the moment he embraced fatherhood. As dessert made its entrance, the girls were enveloped in soft laughter, their hands glistening with melted chocolate, their eyes sparkling with delight. They placed their trust in him with a simplicity that only the innocent could offer. For the first time since Clara vanished, Henry sensed a genuine shift within him. Not guilt, not regret, but a sense of duty. A force more powerful than desire, more profound than trepidation. He was uncertain about what lay ahead, yet one thing was clear. He would not turn his back again. That day, Henry chose not to return to the office. His assistant reached out twice, but he chose to overlook both calls. Instead, he traveled with the girls in the back of a town car, their soft voices weaving through the atmosphere with tentative inquiries and murmurs. They provided him with directions to the apartment where they were currently residing, alongside a woman named Mrs. Elkins, a retired nurse who had been Clara's neighbor for many years. Upon their arrival, Mrs. Elkins greeted them at the door, her expression initially fraught with concern, which melted away as soon as she laid eyes on the girls, safe and beaming. Her gaze darted to Henry, eyes widening in recognition, tinged with a sharp hint of disbelief. "You're him," she stated, not as a query but as a subtle realization. "You are Henry." He nodded, extending a subtle greeting. She refrained from reprimanding him. There was no necessity for her to do so. Her expression conveyed a profound mix of sorrow and weary relief, speaking volumes without a single word. She welcomed him inside and promptly offered him a box. The edges were frayed, and Clara's name was hastily inscribed at the top in her recognizable script. "She requested that I pass this along to you if anything were to occur," Mrs. Elkins remarked, before retreating into the kitchen to allow them some privacy. Henry settled onto the well-loved couch. The girls nestled beside him and raised the lid. Within the confines of the box lay photographs, aged notes, crayon drawings inscribed with the words, "Mommy and me," and a sealed envelope bearing his name. His breath hitched as he unveiled it. Clara's handwriting flowed across the page, irregular and worn in spots, as though it had been crafted through struggle. She detailed the moment she discovered her pregnancy following their separation, her attempts to reach out to him that went unanswered, and her eventual decision to embrace single parenthood and raise the girls on her own. She expressed her pride in them, noting how their smiles mirrored his own. She expressed that if he was perusing the letter, it signified she hadn't survived. And she pleaded that he look after them if he was able, that he would at least make an effort. Henry shut his eyes, clutching the letter with a firm grip, a painful tightness settling in his throat. He had crafted a realm where dominance and structure protected him from the unfamiliar, from chaos, from feeling. Yet all of that was irrelevant at this moment. What truly mattered were the 3 children beside him, gazing up at him not as a CEO, not as a stranger, but as the man their mother had placed her utmost trust in. He gazed down at them and declared, with calm assurance, "I'm not going anywhere." The following hours passed in a blur. He reached out to his attorney to initiate the urgent guardianship documentation. He conversed with Mrs. Elkins regarding ensuring the girls' comfort until plans could be finalized. He organized for a pediatrician to come by. Later, as the girls drifted off to sleep beneath a cozy blanket on the couch, he remained still, the open box resting heavily on his lap, its weight sinking deep into his chest. For the first time in years, his thoughts were not consumed by figures or time constraints. It remained centered on one undeniable fact. These girls belonged to him. Not merely in terms of biology nor solely from a legal standpoint, but in every conceivable way. He had overlooked their initial steps, their first utterances, the early celebrations and minor injuries, but he was determined not to let another moment slip by if he could prevent it. Clara had presented him with a token wrapped in sorrow, and he would pay tribute to it in the only manner he understood, by being present, completely each and every day. As he stepped out of the apartment that night, he chose not to go back to his penthouse. Instead, he opted for a hotel close to the girls, reluctant to be too distant. He reclined in bed, gazing at the ceiling, as he revisited each moment of the day in his thoughts, allowing every pulse of it to sink further into his being. A transformation had taken root within him, unchangeably. He was reluctant to reverse it. Not at this moment. Never. The next morning dawned before Henry had managed to find sleep. Rest had proven to be a challenge, not due to any physical unease, but rather because his thoughts refused to quiet down. Every image from the day before replayed in his mind. The girl's tiny hands, the letter from Clara, the sound of Sophie's voice when she said, "She told us you were our dad." He had experienced pressure in the past, had made choices that altered markets, yet this was something entirely unique. This was an experience that called for a deeper connection, one that required not intensity or force, but gentleness, awareness, and emotion. As dawn broke, he was already freshened up and ready, not in formal attire but in a pair of jeans and a well-worn sweater that had been tucked away in his closet for ages. He felt the urge to transform into a different version of himself, or perhaps to rediscover the essence of who he had been long ago, before the weight of achievements obscured the things that truly mattered. He paused at a quaint bakery en route to the apartment, picking up warm croissants, fresh orange juice, and a bag of chocolate chip cookies, recalling that Grace had mentioned they were her favorite. The chill in the air was crisp yet gentle, and the streets lay in serene silence as he approached the well-known door. Mrs. Elkins greeted him with a gentle smile, nodding silently as she stepped aside, as though he were already a part of the scene. The girls lay peacefully on the couch, each nestled in their own cozy position beneath the shared quilt, one foot peeking out while a hand held tightly onto a beloved, well-worn stuffed rabbit. He sat in the kitchen with Mrs. Elkins, who poured him coffee and said gently, "They've endured more than they reveal." Henry nodded, aware that mere words could never fully capture the depth of her reality. As the girls stirred from their slumber, it was Layla who caught sight of him first. She propped herself up gradually, massaged her eyelids, and offered him a drowsy smile. "You're still here," she murmured, as though she had conjured him from her imagination and questioned the reality of his presence. "I told you I would be," he replied softly. One by one, they entered the kitchen, their senses ignited by the enticing aroma of croissants and the vibrant sight of fresh juice, causing their eyes to widen in delight. The breakfast was modest, yet it felt like a grand celebration. They dined in a tranquil hush, yet it felt far from uncomfortable. It was a sense of ease. It was a comforting embrace. And it was fresh. Following breakfast, Henry inquired whether he could escort them to the park. The concept illuminated their expressions, constricting his throat in response. He summoned his driver to fetch a car, but when the girls expressed their preference for walking, he canceled the request. They strolled together, hand in hand, 3 small sets of fingers intertwined with his. In the park, they dashed across the frost-kissed grass, scaled the jungle gym, and eagerly requested him to give them a push on the swings. He did, chuckling for the first time in what seemed like ages. He lifted them higher and higher, their joyful screams filling the air as they called out, "Higher, Dad," until the words struck him like a ray of sunlight. They were oblivious to the individuals moving past them or the glances from those around them. In that fleeting instant, they existed simply as a man and his 3 little girls, connected by a bond that transcended language. Later, they settled onto a bench, their cheeks rosy from the brisk air, grins lingering brightly on their faces. Layla inquired whether he owned a house. He agreed. Grace inquired whether accommodations were available for everyone. He mentioned that there might be. Sophie remained silent for a moment before finally speaking up. "Can we go there someday?" He acted without a moment's pause. "You'll be there before long," he remarked, his tone unwavering. "Once we confirm that everything is secure and in order." They nodded as if they grasped complexities beyond what any child ought to comprehend. That evening, once the girls were tucked in for the night, Henry found himself once more in the living room with Mrs. Elkins, inquiring about Clara. The older woman revealed fragments of the tale he had yet to discover, detailing Clara's gradual deterioration, the quiet resilience she embodied, and her determination to shield the girls from the depth of her suffering. She had toiled from home for as long as possible, had parted with her jewelry to cover the rent, had accompanied the girls to school even in her frail state. "She remained silent about you," Mrs. Elkins remarked gently. "She simply wished for them to have the opportunity to understand who you truly are." Henry fixed his gaze on the floor, a heavy guilt weighing on his chest, yet beneath it simmered a sense of determination. He was unable to alter the past, unable to mend what had been lost, yet he had the power to craft what would follow. And that, he understood, encompassed it all. Before departing that evening, he gently kissed each girl's forehead while they slumbered, murmuring heartfelt promises he intended to honor. He shall make his return on the morrow. Then came the following day, and the following day. He was more than just a father in title. He was prepared to embrace it fully in every way. Henry started to reshape his existence, making subtle choices that quietly transformed his path. He quietly stepped away without any fanfare or theatrical departures from the corporate scene. He opted to move meetings to the early morning, allowing him to dedicate afternoons to the girls. He delegated additional responsibilities to his executive team, who appeared taken aback yet relieved, and he began arriving late intentionally to avoid the hurried breakfast meetings with them. He had dedicated countless years to crafting an image steeped in control and authority, to the point where he had lost touch with the essence of being needed beyond mere performance. In this moment, he was unearthing a new sense of direction, marked by curious touches, unexpected inquiries about creatures, and the poignant realization of the time that had slipped away from him. The girls had started to welcome him without a second thought, yet he could still sense his own lingering uncertainty. Sophie stood at the forefront of the trio, her demeanor careful yet imbued with an unwavering sense of guardianship. She frequently observed him through a lens of skepticism, assessing his assurances before accepting them as truth. Grace possessed a serene demeanor, often lost in contemplation, her moments of silence culminating in striking and unforeseen revelations. Layla was a whirlwind of feelings, bursting into laughter in an instant, shedding tears just as quickly, and always the first to grasp his hand. In just a few days they had internalized his rhythm, moving with a fluidity that both puzzled and captivated him. On Wednesday he collected them from school for the very first time. They dashed toward him, unafraid, their backpacks jostling, their grins beaming. Other parents observed with interest, possibly identifying him from news articles or questioning how someone in a cashmere coat belonged in the schoolyard. Yet the girls remained indifferent, and so did he. In that instant, as they took hold of his hands and shared stories about art class, snack time, and a classmate named Ava with a hamster called Waffles, he understood he had never felt more alive. Upon returning to the apartment, they enveloped him entirely in their realm. He became acquainted with the names of their plush companions. He constructed a cozy blanket fort in the living room, which they enthusiastically dubbed a secret spy cave. He delved into 3 chapters of an unfamiliar book, employing whimsical voices that sent them into fits of laughter. As the hour for rest approached, they implored him to remain. He gently tucked them in, switched off the light, and then settled outside the door for almost an hour, ensuring they drifted into a peaceful sleep. Later that evening, he reached out to Clara's physician. The hospital had forwarded her medical records as he had asked, and he was eager to comprehend every detail. The dialogue was precise and courteous, yet it unsettled him. She had been aware for months. She had battled for each additional week. She chose to forego aggressive treatment, not out of defeat, but to ensure she remained clear-headed and fully present for her daughters. She had composed letters to them. She had tucked notes within the pages of books. She had woven herself into their existence, ensuring they would always remember her. And then, softly, she had delivered them to him, her final act of trust. Henry spent the night wide awake. He positioned himself by the window, gazing at the twinkling city lights, contemplating the significance of being selected in such a manner. Clara refrained from seeking assistance until the very last moment, and even then she made no demands. She had placed her faith in him to act with integrity, to be present, to love them. He reflected on the years he had dedicated to evading vulnerability, opting for detachment instead of risk, ambition rather than connection. Everything felt hollow now if he let these girls down. Thus, he arrived at a conclusion. He would not merely offer. He would engage deeply, overseeing and planning with intention. He would transform into their sanctuary. He would guide them from the makeshift area into a place brimming with light, warmth, and a sense of security. He would offer them unwavering support, understanding, and affection. He would do it not out of guilt or obligation, but purely from his own desire. When Grace softly whispered, "Good night, Daddy," for the very first time, he fought back the tears. He was determined to achieve it through his own efforts, each and every day. The transition took place on a Sunday morning, subtle and understated, yet brimming with unspoken feelings beneath the calm exterior. Henry had dedicated the past week to preparing every detail with an attention to nuance that transcended his usual meticulousness reserved for business mergers or investor meetings. This was a deeply personal endeavor. He engaged decorators, but only after consulting each of the girls about their preferred room colors, the type of bed they liked, and their favorite books. He carefully selected their drawings and placed them in elegant frames. He filled the kitchen with their beloved cereals, the sugary ones they adored, and even took the time to label the shelves with their names. It lacked perfection. It still lacked the warmth of a true home. Yet it seemed poised to transform into something more. As the girls stepped into the new apartment, a bright corner unit bathed in gentle morning light, they paused in the entryway, caught in a moment of silence, uncertain if they should embrace their excitement. At first, Henry remained silent. He gently placed their bags on the ground, knelt before them, and declared, "This is yours now. Each aspect of it. Your sanctuary." At that moment, Layla burst into the living room and declared, "I claim the window seat." Sophie approached each door with intent, surveying every room before offering a subtle nod of satisfaction. Grace moved deliberately, her fingertips gliding over the walls, as though she were attempting to imprint the surroundings in her memory. They discovered their spaces, their stories, their places to rest. Then they discovered him once more and held on tightly for an extended period. The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of adjusting to new surroundings, school drop-offs, unpacking boxes, mastering the art of untangling hair while braiding, debating over pajama choices, and uncovering the peculiar beeping of the dishwasher every 20 minutes. Henry adjusted his routine to rise earlier than usual, allowing him the pleasure of sharing breakfast with them. He began crafting small notes and tucking them away in their lunchboxes, despite feeling a bit silly initially. The girls would come back in the afternoon, brandishing the notes as if they were treasures from a fantastical realm. They shared playful banter, whimsical tunes for dental hygiene, and a tradition that Friday evenings were reserved for popcorn and films sprawled on the carpet. Gradually, the distance that separated them vanished. Yet, beneath the joy and freshness, there lingered instances of silence that extended uncomfortably. One day, Henry discovered Grace gazing at a picture of Clara in her room. She remained composed. She cradled the frame in her lap and remarked, "At times I lose the memory of what her voice was like." Henry settled next to her and remarked, "Then we'll cherish this memory together." He listened to the solitary voicemail Clara had sent him, the one he had preserved over the years, uncertain of the reason behind his choice. She casually mentioned something mundane, something about leaving a book at his place. Yet her voice lingered on. For Grace, that meant the world. Sophie, always the reserved soul, found it difficult to drift off in her new surroundings. Henry observed her meandering through the dimly lit hallway at night, a blanket draped around her shoulders. He refrained from asking questions. He created a cozy nook on the couch for her, allowing her to drift into slumber beside him, occasionally wrapping his arm around her, other times simply sharing the quietude. Layla, however, started to refer to him as Dad more regularly now, not during significant occasions, but in casual moments like, "Dad, can I have more juice?" or "Dad, I forgot my math folder." Every time, it struck him with an unforeseen intensity. He would nod, respond as expected, and then retreat to his room, perching on the edge of the bed, awestruck by the serene wonder of it all. It wasn't entirely straightforward. There were outbursts, overlooked assignments, unanswered work calls, and moments when Henry felt utterly unprepared. At moments, he found himself wrestling with uncertainty, the burden of his missed opportunities almost overwhelming him. Yet, there were instances that stood out, like observing the girls twirl in the living room clad in socks and pajamas, or the joyful shouts of his name as he entered, or catching a glimpse of Grace sketching their new home, complete with all four of them, simply titled, "Us." Those moments transformed his entire understanding of what truly held significance. One evening, as he tucked them in, Sophie asked, "Will you stay with us forever?" Henry gazed at her, at all three of them, and declared, "I'll remain for every single forever you require." He pressed his lips to each of their foreheads, extinguished the light, and lingered in the doorway for a heartbeat longer than necessary, absorbing the gentle rhythm of the breaths from the daughters he had nearly lost and now found unimaginable to live without. Spring arrived quietly, gently altering the city streets with warm sunlight and the delicate hue of flowers blooming on the trees. For Henry, the season unfolded a tranquility he hadn't known he was longing for. Life had transformed into a lovely routine. The sterile evenings, once dominated by silence and emails, have vanished. His mornings unfolded with the gentle buzz of animated shows, the delightful frenzy of preparing school lunches, and the pitter-patter of little feet dancing across the hardwood floors. The girls had found a cadence that seemed as if they had always belonged there. Their laughter cascaded through the apartment in delightful bursts, transforming it from a mere shelter for rest into a vibrant, pulsating space. Every girl discovered her unique path to flourish in this new existence. Sophie embraced the art of organization, arranging books, sorting shoes, and even categorizing breakfast cereal. She relished the sense of control, and Henry recognized that it stemmed from a desire to maintain a world that had once seemed on the brink of collapse. Grace started crafting poems, softly jotting them down in notebooks and placing them in various nooks of the house for someone to discover. Her words carried a gentle simplicity and sincerity that simultaneously shattered and healed Henry's heart. Layla was relentless in her curiosity, inquiring about the moon, the mechanics of coffee, and the possibility of keeping penguins as pets. Henry responded to each question, even when uncertainty loomed, for the essence lay in the trust she placed in him to seek his insight. A new tradition blossomed every Sunday, a delightful brunch followed by a stroll to the bookstore, where each girl had the joy of selecting one item, regardless of whether it was a book or not. One morning, while waiting in line to pay, the cashier glanced at Henry and the girls, smiling as she remarked, "You've got your hands full." Without hesitation, Henry responded, "Absolutely," brimming with all the things I never realized I was missing. The girls remained oblivious to the gravity of that statement, yet he was acutely aware. He sensed it remain within him as they strolled home, fingers intertwined. During that week, Sophie was engaged in a school project centered around families. Every student was required to showcase a photograph depicting their home life and articulate the details of their living arrangements. Henry suggested capturing a new photo, and they arranged themselves in the kitchen, flour dusting their cheeks from an unsuccessful pancake attempt, grins so broad they couldn't be feigned. As Sophie stood at the front of the classroom to present, she gestured toward the photo and said, "This is me, my sisters, and my dad." Initially, he was unaware that we belonged to him, yet he showed up regardless, and he remained. That's what truly defines a genuine family. Henry, positioned at the rear alongside the other parents, discreetly turned his head to dab at his eyes before anyone could catch on. Later that evening, as she folded laundry, Grace entered with one of her poems in hand. Without uttering a word, she set it down next to him and exited the room. He grasped it and perused it with deliberate slowness. The poem bore the title, Promise, concluding with the poignant line, "He didn't say forever." Yet he truly intended it all the same. Henry shut his eyes and pressed the page against his heart. He had never been one for verse, not in the past, but that single line resonated with a truth deeper than any agreement he had ever entered into. As the girls prepared for slumber that evening, Henry observed them twirling about their rooms in mismatched pajamas, brushing their teeth to whimsical tunes, and sharing giggles over secrets known only to them. The apartment hummed with a subtle enchantment that transcended mere aesthetics or opulence. It emerged from the existence of something Henry had spent the majority of his life lacking: unwavering affection. A love that required no earning, no explanations, and no justifications. It existed effortlessly, cradled in small embraces and whispered tales under the stars, buoyed by the unwavering faith of three girls who held more belief in him than he had ever mustered for himself. Once they had drifted off to sleep, Henry found himself standing solitary in the hallway, gazing down the row of ajar doors, each gently illuminated from inside. He reflected on Clara, on the way she had nurtured them single-handedly, and the immense bravery it must have required to entrust them to him with nothing but a note and a prayer. He murmured softly into the stillness, expressing gratitude, uncertain if she could perceive his words, yet compelled to voice them regardless. Even in her absence, she had bestowed upon him the one thing he never imagined he could possess: a family. He was determined to safeguard it with every ounce of strength he had remaining. The one-year milestone passed subtly, devoid of celebration or proclamation, precisely as Clara would have preferred. Henry had not orchestrated anything grand, yet he had contemplated it for weeks, wavering between allowing the day to drift by like any other or recognizing it in a significant manner. Ultimately, he opted for something straightforward. He informed the girls that they would be enjoying a day free from school and work, dedicating their time to each other outdoors, far removed from the usual routines and responsibilities. He refrained from labeling it an anniversary or attempting to convey its significance to them. He simply suggested, "Let's visit a place she would have adored," and they grasped the sentiment without further explanation. They journeyed to a serene meadow beyond the city's hustle, where wildflowers were just starting to unfurl their vibrant petals. The atmosphere was crisp and refreshing, imbued with a tranquility that seemed almost divine. Henry prepared a delightful picnic, featuring the girls' favorite sandwiches, a rich chocolate cake, and a thermos filled with tea. They spread everything out on a blanket beneath a majestic white tree. Grace carefully set down a small framed photo of Clara in the center, treating it like a cherished guest of honor. Sophie clutched a folded letter she had penned, remaining silent for an extended period, her gaze drifting down to it repeatedly as if anticipating the perfect moment to share her words. Layla held a vibrant bouquet of wildflowers, grasped firmly in her delicate hands. Once they finished their meal, Henry encouraged them to recount their tales, and the girls eagerly took their turns. Grace recalled the soothing melody Clara would hum, a wordless lullaby that enveloped her in a sense of safety. Layla recounted how Clara would allow them to don her scarves and transform it into a fashion show, even on days when she felt too fatigued to stand. Sophie finally read her letter aloud, her voice trembling yet resolute. In her words, she expressed gratitude to Clara for all she had done, for the love she shared, for her courage, and for ensuring they would never feel isolated. Upon her completion, Henry found himself at a loss for words. He extended his hand toward hers, grasping it firmly. One by one, they let go of small slips of paper into the breeze, each carrying memories, hopes, and promises, all crafted in crayon and pencil and meticulously folded. Henry contributed one of his own, yet he chose not to share it vocally. It merely stated, "I shall not squander a single day you have granted me." The papers ascended gracefully, embraced by the gentle breeze, and soared higher until they vanished from sight. For an extended period, they remained quiet, gazing at the sky as though anticipating a response that was unnecessary. A serene calm enveloped all four of them, devoid of tears. Returning home that evening, the apartment exuded a familiar essence yet carried an unmistakable shift. The girls glided through the space with a gentle grace, as though an unseen force had rearranged the atmosphere, welcoming the emergence of something fresh. In the kitchen, Henry prepared tea, the warm aroma filling the air, while the girls nestled on the couch, wrapped in a cozy blanket, lost in the world of their movie. They didn't request toys, screen time, or snacks. They simply yearned for proximity. He presented them with steaming mugs of cocoa and settled between them, their bodies leaning into his sides. All three nestled together as if that very space had been destined for them from the start. As the film drew to a close, Layla leaned in and softly asked, "She'd be happy, wouldn't she?" Henry gazed at her, taking in the radiant faces of all three girls illuminated by the gentle light, and replied without a moment's pause, "She would be proud. About you, concerning us, reflecting on the distance we've traveled." Sophie leaned against him, her head finding a comfortable spot on his shoulder, while Grace gently laid her small but firm hand over his, a gesture of quiet support. At that instant, uncertainty had no place. There is no space for remorse or apprehension, exclusively belonging. Once the girls were tucked in for the night, Henry found himself standing solitary on the balcony, gazing out at the twinkling city lights. The skyline had previously represented all that he had created: his influence, his prestige, his dominance. At that moment, it served merely as a setting for what truly held significance within those four walls behind him. He reflected on the myriad iterations of himself he had once inhabited. The ambitious executive, the emotionally distant individual, the one who believed he could escape suffering through achievement. He was determined to leave behind the man he once was. He simply desired to embrace the role of their father. That sufficed. He retreated into the room, secured the door with a click, and extinguished the lights. In the shadows, he glided silently through the apartment, stopping at each of their doors, attuned to the gentle rhythm of their breathing, observing the subtle rise and fall of the blankets. Then he whispered, Not to anyone in particular, but to the very air around him. I kept my promise. And with that, he embraced the stillness, not as a burden, but as a sanctuary.